Mr Abbott, welcome back to 7:30.
Nice to be with you, Lee.
What's your strategy for tomorrow's party room meeting regarding the National Energy Guarantee?
Lee, there are two issues here. The first is the National Energy Guarantee, which I think is very poor policy because it's about reducing emissions, not about reducing price. The second is legislating the Paris targets. Now, the problem with putting voluntary targets into law is that it makes them mandatory. It means that they are now absolutely set in stone, and there will be massive penalties if we don't make them. Now, no other country, to the best of my knowledge, even those that are still in Paris, has set itself up for massive penalties on people that are adding to carbon dioxide emissions.
But the whole point of legislation is that it provides certainty for industry and business. That's why there are penalties for non-compliance, and certainty is what the business sector and the energy sector has been crying out for.
How can anything be certain if the whole thing is going to be reviewed in 5 or even in 3 years' time? And how can anything be certainly when the Labor Party says that if the National Energy Guarantee gets into place, it will ramp up the emissions reductions from where the government has them, 26% to 45%. So there's no certainty in this.
Well, on the point about the 26%, in August 2015, you said that your government had a definite commitment to reduce emissions by 26% by 2030, but we believe under the policies we've got, with the circumstances we think will apply, that we can go to 28%. So when you were Prime Minister, you were actually advocating a higher target than what's on the table now.
Three things, Lee. First of all, that commitment was said to apply if every country was bound, if it was, and I quote, applicable to all. That's the first thing. Second thing I say is that we now know that not only have China and India no emissions reduction commitments, but the United States has completely pulled out of Paris. And the third point I make is that we were advised at the time that we could achieve 26 to 28% without any economic dislocation and without new policy. Now, all of these things have turned out not to be true. And again, Lee, when circumstances change, you change your opinion. What was a reasonable position then in 2015 is a completely unreasonable position today, almost 3 years later. But the other point that I really must stress, Lee, we signed up for voluntary targets. If they go into law, they become absolutely mandatory with massive penalties on them, and that's a very, very significant difference.
In question times today, the Prime Minister was asked about your view that power prices will not fall under the NEG, and he effectively called you both an idiot and an ideologue. Well,
idiocy is doing more of the same and expecting a different result. We have massively increased renewables, and what have we got? We've got a doubling of price, we've got blackouts and rationing now routine. If you want to increase renewables even more, that is to say unreliable power, from the current 17% to 36%, we are going to get more of the same.
But that's one could argue the contrary thing. If we tackled this problem,
more of blackouts and rationing.
One could argue the exact opposite, that if we tackled these things, say back in 2009 when an emissions trading scheme was on the table, then perhaps we would already be on a path to having a more secure and cheaper power supply.
Why would the modelling be right this time when the modelling has been wrong on every previous occasion? I mean, I can remember, Lee, back in 2014, modelling was prepared for the Warburton Review. That modelling purported to show that increasing the renewable energy target would reduce prices. It turned out to be completely, absolutely and utterly false. If you look around the world, the countries with the highest energy prices are the countries that have got the highest percentage of renewables in the system, because the problem with renewables is that they are not 24/7 power. And if it's not 24/7, it's not really power. We have got to be able to turn the switch and have the lights go on. But if you're relying on wind and solar, the wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine. So there's always got to be backup. And that's what makes renewables so absolutely expensive.
Well, this energy plan has the support of everybody from the Council of Social Services to the Business Council of Australia to farmers to miners to the Clean Energy Council. Are all of them wrong?
Sure, the business establishment, which wants to be polite to the government because it knows that Labor's plans are even worse. The business establishment is backing this.
Business has never felt the
but
need
let's not
to
forget,
not
Lee,
state their point of view.
The business establishment was also in favour of an emissions trading scheme. So the business establishment has been wrong before. I would simply point you, Lee, to the head of Tomago Aluminium, who said today that if we don't keep coal in the system, the risk is that we deindustrialise our country. Now, he is the man who should be listened to because, let's face it, his plant is the one that's had to close repeatedly because of the policies that we've already got in place, and there's going to be even more of that under this system.
Let me ask you about another matter which is going to be coming up before the Parliament shortly. What do you think the government should do with its company tax policy?
Look, I'm really keen to talk about the National Energy Guarantee because, Lee, this is a watershed for our country.
Well, I want to ask you about the company tax policy.
I'll come to that in a second, Lee, but I really want to just conclude the energy discussion. This is by far the most important decision that this Parliament will take. This is by far the most important issue that the government confronts because this will shape our economy. This will determine our prosperity and the kind of industries we have for decades to come. That's why this is so important, and that's why any attempt to try to snow this through, to kind of ram this through the party room tomorrow, to try to make us sign up to what is essentially the state Labor Premier's energy policy would be dead wrong. OK, company tax. Now, I've said before that company tax cuts are good economics. They're good economics. In the context of wider tax reform, I think company tax cuts are a very good thing. I'm pleased that the government has already got a significant company tax cuts in place. I hope that the tax cuts for very large businesses can also go into place, but I think it would be a lot easier to get the final tranche of company tax cuts passed if it was in the context of wider tax reform.
OK, let me play you something that you said when you were replaced as Prime Minister.
Leadership changes are never easy for our country. My pledge today is to make this change as easy as I can. There will be no wrecking, no undermining and no sniping.
Could you look Malcolm Turnbull in the eye and say that you've not been a sniper or a wrecker?
Oh, look, there has been no leaking. There has been no briefing against the government.
Sniping, wrecking?
There has been none of that. Look, I have talked in this term of Parliament, but not prior to the 2016 election, I have talked a lot about policy because I want this government to be the best it possibly can be. But I've confined myself, as I think is quite proper for a backbench member of Parliament, to policy. As I said, you know, Lee, what I say to journalists off the record. You would also know what some of my former colleagues said to journalists off the record, and I'm prepared to back myself against my former colleagues when it comes to playing it straight and playing it fair.
Is it fair to say you're still the country's most effective opposition leader?
Look, I think it's very important to tell the people of Australia what is in our long-term best interests, and what we need is a power system which is run to give us affordable, reliable power, not run to reduce emissions. And this is the flaw at the heart of the National Energy Guarantee.
Tony Abbott, many thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Lee.